This is a part of our DLT and Blockchain in the Real World series, which has been an exciting series to get to know a little bit about the startups and projects that are bringing this technology and distributed ledgers to life. Really excited to talk with Entrust today. I believe you've already logged roughly 250,000 liters of wine on the platform, which is pretty neat. So curious to learn more about that and how you enable the really paradigm shift in bringing authenticity and integrity into an industry that really needs it, which, certainly from an outsider's perspective, didn't really realize that at first. So maybe we can get into a little bit of that as well. With me today are Jeffrey Grossett and Rob Allen. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Gary.
Hey, Gary.
Thank you guys for joining us today. Super excited. I think the community knows Rob by now, but hopefully they can see him again. And really, we're talking about combating $3 billion in wine fraud with Entrust. Entrust is an agricultural integrity supply chain platform, and they've done a lot of work already in a very quick amount of time, which I've been very impressed with and excited to share with you today. Before we do, it's important to set the stage here. Hedera Hashgraph itself is really focused on bringing this public distributed ledger technology to market and to the mainstream. We really pride ourselves on these 4 categories in doing that, and I think you'll see that come out today with Entrust and what they pride themselves on as well to tie this really nicely together. A lot of these things come to us from the ability of Hashgraph, our consensus algorithm, and our network governance model. This at a high level is really our platform and network. We provide APIs and network services with our cryptocurrency and consensus service. We also excitingly added to the preview net, at least today, our token service, which I'm excited to get our hands on and see the types of applications that come out of that. All of these network services utilize that Hashgraph consensus algorithm, which really provides a fast, fair, and secure mechanism for achieving consensus on all these transactions in only a few seconds with finality and a high grade of security. And that entire network infrastructure is managed by our Hedera Governing Council. For projects like Entrust, the primary service that they're looking at using, and we're here to talk about today, is our consensus service. This allows them to, which we'll hear more from them later on, to really build natively on the network, a flexible, arbitrary data tool to log the information that we'll see throughout their supply chain and ability to prove that information to outside parties. So really, using a multi-party platform solution through the use of this distributed ledger technology. And without further ado, I think, we should really get to the meat of this, which is Entrust and Jeffrey. Jeffrey, would you like to take it away?
Gary, thank you. Well, I think to me, Entrust utilizes what I refer to, which you've just shown as pretty complex technology, to achieve something actually quite simple. And that is to ensure the provenance, the authenticity, and the integrity of a product. And we, in the case of our alpha and beta trials, we used wine. But it's interesting, it didn't take long before we realized that it doesn't just apply to wine. I mean, the obvious ones were, dairy, honey. I don't know if you've had some fraud issues, but, tea, olive oil. In fact, anything where the authenticity of a product is relevant, that is relevant either to your enjoyment, to your health, or to your safety, or all of those. We think this has a place. So essentially, what we're dealing with were 2 issues really, but the main one is fraud. The other one is to simplify the system in wine. I don't know how many of people watching are involved in the wine industry, but I think across the world it's often a bit antiquated. In Australia, it really needs to be dragged into the 21st century. So we feel that that's an obvious simplifying of the system. But the other one is fraud. And so a lot of people will know about fraud in wine, perhaps with the fact that you have an expensive bottle of wine and it's refilled and sold again, and it's not the real thing. However, the fraud can occur at any point. And we've realized that while that's relevant to quite expensive wines, it's possible that at the source, the grapes that are high value, it could be, you know, Napa Cabernet or here, you know, Clare Valley Riesling, whatever. If there's a possibility of substituting that with a cheaper supply, there are people who are doing that. And so the idea of this is to geolocate and timestamp at every point. So that's a quick rundown of, so that's why we thought we need this. It'll simplify people's lives. But the issue of fraud is, you know, the biggest way to sum it up, when I notice you put in what it's probably costing the world, the other side of that is we actually don't know. And so, you know, but we know it's pretty big. So that's what we're attempting to resolve.
That's great, Jeffrey. And if I understand correctly, Australia even has an integrity program as well that you're aligning towards. Is that right?
Yeah, sure. So Australia has, I think, one of the best label integrity programs, has been in place for 20 years. So what that means is that auditors or inspectors will come and visit us as a winery. Grossett Wines is small, high quality producer, and we'll get 1 or 2 visits a year from an inspector just checking our records and our books. This means that when we say it's Grossett Clare Valley Riesling, it is from us, it is from the Clare Valley region, and it is that variety and that year that we state. The issue at the moment is, I guess there are 3 things that really make this relevant right now, other than the fact that we just need to do it. The first one's COVID. We nearly got 5 minutes into a conversation without mentioning it. So the issue is that the inspectors are not inspecting, you know, they're not traveling. And so the risk at the moment is higher. The other thing is that when we export, and I think it's the same for most countries, there's a lot of paperwork involved. For us to export to the UK, it's 4 sets of paperwork. So with this, we're doing a trial through Wine Australia with the UK to eliminate all of that, and to carry the information on the bottle. And I'll just perhaps just show you at this point that if you take a bottle like this, just happens to be mine, so you know, hey, seems like the best idea. We actually have in this cap called N-Seal a chip that's carrying the information, and it can tell when it's been opened. So in the case of, it's just a matter of passing the phone over this cap, and the information can be extracted. And so inspectors can simply grab a bottle and do an audit remotely. And this also, of course, allows consumers at the other end, anywhere in the world, if they have a relatively new smartphone, to check the ID. We would hope that in time, because of the distinctness of that cap, that they'll just look at that and go, you know what, there's a very, very high chance that it's absolutely fine, but they can check it. So they're really the things. When we have conflict as well is the other issue. I don't know if you've heard, but China's claimed that we may be dumping wine into China. And to resolve that and resolve it quickly, we need a lot of information to be given to them. And we have been struggling to clear it so that we can get back to normal trade. With this, it would be much, much simpler. So they're the 3 things that I think are really current and important, you know, for us right now.
That's great, and certainly seems like a time to use this opportunity. And then, Rob, I think you're going to show us through a little bit of what the platform itself looks like. Is that right?
Yeah. Hi, Garrick. Thank you. Yes. So what I'll do is I'll take you through a few slides just to give the viewers a kind of mental context for what we do and how it relates to what Jeff was just saying. And then I'll run the demo. So with my cute little clip art pictures here, what this shows really is that first phase in the wine harvest. So from the vineyard itself through distribution to a weighbridge to the winery, and then ultimately into the first vessel after a crush or a press. So the label integrity program that Jeff was referring to is a regulatory framework here in Australia that ensures the quality of Australian wines. And it defines some very key events along the winemaking process. And we capture all those events. So after a parcel, which is wine nomenclature for a kind of an order of fruit, is made by the winery, the vineyard manager bundles that up and gives it to a driver. Well, that's recorded, that's geolocated and time-stamped. And guess what? That event gets put onto the Hedera consensus service. Okay, so we're immutably stamping that event on the HCS. And then we get to the weighbridge, and the weighbridge records that fruit, the weight, the actual weight, as opposed to the estimated weight that got sent from the vineyard. And again, we timestamp and we write that transaction to the Hedera consensus service, and so on through the key points that are well defined by the regulator, right the way through to the first vessel. And then the winemaking process starts, and this is the secret sauce of a winery, right? So from first vessel to final vessel, the final finish for the wine, there may be multiple transfers. It may sit on barrels for a while. There'll be additives and various other magic that happens in between that is very unique to that winemaker. All of these events that are defined by the label integrity program are written to Hedera consensus service. Now, I have to say that this is entirely private because of the nature of the winemaking process. We wouldn't get wineries on the platform if it weren't entirely secret. So, of course, we hash the data before it goes to the Hedera consensus service. There is nothing in clear. And of course, there is the data on the platform itself is private too. So we proceed through the winemaking process. We write all these events to the Hedera consensus service. And then ultimately, the wine is bottled. And as Jeff said, we've got this patented digital screw cap, the end seal cap, which gets put on. And basically anyone with the right app will be able to identify the provenance and trust that provenance of that wine. So not just the, like most track and trace type supply chain use cases where you know from the product, from the factory door, going down the distribution chain, we actually track it all the way back to the paddock, back to the very vine that it was collected from, and how it then complies with both the law, the label integrity program. So as Jeff said, if it says it's a Riesling from Clare Valley, then it has to be at least 85% from Clare Valley Riesling grapes. And we, for the first time, are able to demonstrate that with a level of trust that is, authentic, time-stamped, and geolocated all the way down that winemaking process. So it doesn't look like this anymore. We've changed the UI a little, but you can imagine you scan the cap on the bottle, and then you receive all those events that have been written to Hedera in whatever order the user interface shows. So let me show you the actual thing working. Let me share myself into another screen.
And then while you're doing that, Rob, I'm just curious, do you find, and this is more of a question for the industry, but are most of these, digital processes that you're bringing online for the first time and augmenting it with this technology, or are you replacing existing digitized processes?
No, there are no, there are some old school platforms that support the process, but there's nothing which goes all the way back to the grape. And provides that level of authenticity and kind of tamper-proofing that a distributed ledger offers. Now, when we get into, I'll explain in a minute why we chose Hedera, but some of these larger wineries have massive throughput. They bottle thousands of bottles a minute. So in order to be able to keep up with that, we needed a very high throughput, highly transactional distributed ledger.
Makes
And
sense.
that's why we, one of the reasons we ended up with Hedera. So can you
Great.
see my screen now?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, we've got a very simple, very stylish, clean user interface for Entrust. We're still in beta, so there's a few wrinkles, but and we're still adding features right now. But just to show you briefly, with the time that we've got, if I were a winemaker, I'm managing my vineyards. I've got a couple here. Look, Sharky's Heights is a favorite of mine. I can manage the blocks. The blocks are the kind of the sub sections of vineyards. I can, if you imagine that that flow that I showed you with my clip art slides just now, I can request a harvest. So I can put in a parcel request, and select from my favorite blocks. There's Sharky's Heights. That's today, delivery time. I'll just bring it to Sharky's Wines because that's my favorite winery in the entire world, 5 tons. So we create this parcel request, and that goes to the wine grower. And if I go to my label integrity, this is the one that I've just created. So all of my events are listed here. The UI is going to be a bit better when in time, but where I can sort them and see more data. But we'll come back to this in a minute. Going back to my harvest, I can then collect the fruit, send it to the winery, and again, put in some of the information that I need. Who's going to collect it? Oh, look, Sharky Bob. He's always a driver of great integrity. And submit. So this is actually enacted that operation of collecting the grapes and sending them to the weighbridge. And now we have a weighbridge, and we can select that same vehicle. There's Sharky Bob. He turns up. He's got all of that that we wanted. And you see I've been geolocated. This would normally happen, at the weighbridge itself. And if I go back to my label integrity, we've got another one there. And if I go to Kabuto, you can see it's already on the distributed ledger. This is on the main net. So this transaction that I've just delivered to the weighbridge in real time has been logged onto Hedera.
Very cool.
That's as quick as it, well, we all know, but that's as quick as it gets. And so we're able to do all sorts of things on top of that. We plan to be able to do analytics. We can do real-time delivery tracking. We can determine whether or not drivers are redirecting themselves between points, between collection and delivery. So we can do some analysis on whether or not to trust what's being delivered. All those sorts of things can be added to that once you've got this real-time feed of data, and it's entirely trusted. Entrust, it's entirely trusted. So and then winemaking. I won't labor this because this is a live beta platform, and any of the audience here can go on and pretend to make their own wine and check it on Hedera right there, right now. And if they want to become winemakers, then this will help them as well, of course. Cool. So that's where we are. Let me just. Any questions there, Gary? Before I move on.
I think you'll likely hit on most of the Hedera points in this next session here. Most of the questions from the audience are really about the QR code and the wine cap as well. I don't know if this is a good point to, kind of walk through that a little bit more too.
Yeah, we can hand that back to Jeff. He's a very modest man, but he's the inventor of this. Actually, he invented the original screw cap for wine.
Wow.
So innovation is kind of in his genes, quite literally. Right, let me stop this.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. No, no, not modest, just lacking. I mean, my training's in winemaking, so I guess in listening to that, a couple of things, not just to give a plug to Hedera, but to say we actually started on a blockchain road, and we changed because we needed speed and efficiency, really. So we've shifted, and you know, I mean, people viewing know the rest of the story about Hedera. And I mean, to me, that's a major breakthrough, because we just saw that we needed a lot of recording, and we need it quickly and efficiently. But at the same time, too, this is not my expertise, but in the cap itself, this is an NFC compliant tag tamper technology. So when I mention that, which I can get again, the important thing here is that this is, say simply, this has a chip, a tiny chip in it, that records a limited amount of information, but everything we need. And it actually, if you tamper with this, or you go to open this, it actually knows that. That's really as simple as I can put it. So in here is a chip carrying the information. And so therefore, in terms of this other information, I mean, these barcodes and QR codes that people are using, they become obsolete really with this. So, and the great thing about it is that it's invisible. But so all I can say, I think at the moment, is that it can tell when you've tampered, if someone's tampered with this, and it carries all the information that it needs. And it's basically invisible, and it's in here. Of course, in the States and other major wine producing countries, the screw cap, which has been 95% of our production here for nearly 20 years now, about 17 or 18 years. There's a long story there, which this isn't about, but I mean, it's beautiful. It's perfect for keeping wines as they should be, and that does allow them to age because they're slightly permeable, like a low permeability cork. But we have, realizing that the rest of the world still uses more cork, we have adopted this same thing to be a closure that is has the same information, carrying the same information, and can tell when it's been tampered with, because at any point here, if it's tampered with, it can tell. So we have a cork version as well, so that the rest of the world, while they're catching up to changing to screw cap, the closure of this century, that's more reliable, because cork has been wonderful for hundreds of years. It was the only option really for so long, but it is flawed because it can give off characters or wines age differently. We've allowed for that as well. We've got that covered.
That's fantastic and really interesting to hear.
I'll just mention one more thing, Gary, and that, as well as mention about the speed and efficiency, just to highlight this fraud, you know, because I said we don't really know, but the information we get back from Wine Australia and other regulating bodies is that most people, I think, assume that, I don't know if anyone's heard that sort of almost cliche story of an amazing French bottle that is opened in China. And in fact, it's then someone gets the cork and they refill it. Or in fact, the French producer, I think there was a documentary where he said that, well, more of his wine is sold in China than he makes. So he thinks maybe something's going on, right? So all of that is a typical story. And yet it appears that the majority, maybe 70% of the fraud, and not just with wine, is occurring at the source. So, you know, it's where, you know, you're going to pick the crop, in our case, the grapes, but they're substituted right at the start. And so it's never picked up. So to me, even though the other end is the high-end example that people know about, it can occur at any part of the supply chain, but the source is critical. And that's why time stamping, geolocating, and having that recorded immutably and quickly in the case of Hedera, of course, that's absolutely critical and a key point to breaking this cycle of fraud.
Very good. Thanks for that, Jeffrey. And then, you know, I think, Rob, you were, in your own words, going to go through the selection of Hedera Hashgraph.
Just go into a little more detail then. So why Hedera? Well, you know, both Jeff and I have touched on these things, but we needed a distributed ledger. Entrust had been through a process of selecting a different technology that wasn't fit for purpose previous to me joining. But there is a fundamental requirement in the solution to the problem that we're trying to solve for data integrity and data integrity in a production process. There's also this aspect of an external third-party auditor or inspector in Wine Australia, a typical distributed ledger use case. We see it all the time. You know, you need trust inherent in the system and the ability to have an external third party with their own mirror node in this case, or access to the public network so that they can verify the data. Well, that's, you know, that led us to this technology as well. But we needed high volume, we needed high throughput, we needed that kind of that timestamp, and Hedera is perfectly placed for that particular use case. It's got to be fast, it's got to be secure. The cost effectiveness is really important as well. You know, Entrust is a startup, it's agri-tech startup, and being able to forecast cost based on the transactional throughput is super important. So having the transactions pegged at a 1/100th of a cent enables that. And then finally, it's really very easy to integrate with the Hedera consensus service. And so, you know, being a startup and selecting the technology enabled us to do that. But of course, it's not just about HCS. Hedera, I mean, just today has launched the Hedera token service. I think you alluded to earlier, which is in the preview net, which is really exciting. Things like document and certificate provenance. You know, all wines carry a whole bunch of certificates and documentation with them, whether it be the certificate of it being organic or biodynamic, the paper that is transferred with the wine through the supply chain, or the export documentation that goes with, you know, to the authorities at the import end of the supply chain. So all of this we're now looking at attaching as digital assets, and Hedera being kind of a multi-purpose chain enables us to do that.
Sure.
Of course, we've just done the upstream part of the supply chain. So now we're going to be doing the downstream. Now we've got the digital screw cap, the end-seal cap. It enables us to create a digital twin of the bottle with the physical product, and together those things can be traced down the supply chain. So our end-seal cap is effectively an Internet of Things device. Once you've got an Internet of Things device, you can start looking at identity of things. So digital identity, whether it be fungible or non-fungible, of these bottles can be applied. And again, the token service looks like it's going to be able to do that. And then ultimately, or actually in parallel with this, we've got delivery versus payment. So some of the key friction points within supply chains is that handover and the payment, the trade finance, the clearing of funds, that sort of thing, creates lag in the system. So payment flow back up stream as delivery of product downstream needs to be tightened up. And we're very close to adding that in as well. And then finally, the roadmap. We launched the Alpha platform back in February so that we could capture the data in this year's vintage. So in Australia, the vintage is February to April time. We had 15 wineries, and as you said earlier, 250 million liters of wine created. The 250,000.
There you go.
That would have been a lot. It was the biggest wine blockchain trial in the world ever. Our beta release has just been launched. It was launched by the South Australian Premier last month, and we're planning on getting the full version out in the new year, immediately prior to the 2021 vintage. Before that, we're running a trial with Wine Australia. As Jeff said, you know, the COVID impact and the ability to do remote audits from their desks is going to transform their ability to do their inspections.
Mm-hmm.
And then a paperless export trial into the UK will quickly follow, as well as expanding into other sectors. So, you know, I've got dairy, beef, and wool here. Jeff also mentioned olive oil, honey, anything that we consume that we need to know it's safe. Then, you know, we're targeting it. And finally, just that's some of our partner wineries. So if your favorite wines are on that list, then you're in good company.
Very good. Well, fantastic. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Jeffrey. I know Manon actually had a question here that is a little bit of a fun one, but when and where can I buy a bottle, and which wine should I buy to open once Hedera is 10 years old?
Well, I'll say, Jeff, Grossett Polish Hill Riesling is one of my favorites. So that's a good one to start with. I'm not sure
Rob.
10 years though.
Yes, 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, 15 years. Yeah, they've got a reputation for aging a long time. They're one of the most collected. And it's nice too, because that's, most people don't think about Riesling being collected and aging long term. So there's a nice little plug for Grosset. I might as well slip that in. Yeah, buy it with great confidence.
Very good. Thanks for the recommendation. You know, certainly a fascinating platform, especially to see the level of standard of integrity, both from, you know, really the grape to the glass, I know, as you like to put it, Rob. So really interesting on that. Is it, you know, if someone's watching this and thinking, you know, is blockchain right for me in this use case, you know, what suggestions would you have for them?
I'd say, well, not necessarily just blockchain. I mean, Hedera, any startup can, any process has a need for integrity. I mean, all business processes have a need for integrity. And we write to databases all the time, our platforms. There are always events within a business process where you could benefit from demonstrating that integrity. We just haven't had the technology to be able to do that thus far. So, you know, it's going to be very much based on the specific case-by-case basis of that business. But if there is a need for an external party, whether it be a customer or an auditor, to trust what you're telling them, then absolutely, I would suggest just log it to Hedera, and it's like having a free notary, or a notary that costs 1/100 of a cent anyway. Because at any point in time in the future, if you know, if it goes to the courts, or if something happens that is that needs to get lawyers involved, you've got the evidence, and it's not just an email trail or some database that could have been manipulated. You can demonstrate your you know, whiter than white.
Absolutely.
That's a massive use case for all business.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, especially when you think about, you know, some downstream effects of bad portion of food or whatever it might be, and trying to remedy that as early in the process as possible.
I think as well, Gary, the thing is that what I'm aware of too is that the harder it is to execute fraud, you know, the less likely people are, of course, to do it. I mean, that's very basic. So we've got two things working there. To me, once we get a decent number of people on this, then it just gets too hard in a way, because you're recording immutably points. And so where, you know, people can't substitute fruit anymore. So, you know, they'll probably just move on to something else. But from my point of view too, also, you know, I mean, I had a few sleepless nights just getting my head around Hedera. So I was just like to say that I did commit to trying to work out what the hell, how does this work? And really ultimately, you know, the ease and the speed and to some extent the cost, but the efficiency of the system determines how readily people will take it on. And if it's pretty much effortless, which is what we're attempting to do, and I think we're getting there, if it's pretty much effortless and it doesn't involve a lot of energy, you know, a lot of attention from the people concerned, it'll just happen. So you've got that happening on one side, and essentially as that's occurring, a virtual elimination of fraud, or those people performing fraud will probably go off to somewhere else, you know, where it's easier, their lives are easier. So, you know, that's what I think will occur as we introduce this. And obviously your company, you know, plays a major role in that because of that, what I see as that efficiency.
Absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. I'm curious, in your sleepless nights, did you have an aha moment or anything that made you quick to understand the technology and its implications?
Yeah, I started with the website and I worked through that, nearly did me in, but I got the general concept, and then other stuff that was written started to make sense. So yeah, I'm pretty cool now. But as I said, I just pick up the easiest things, is that, you know, it works. You know, it's giving us what we want. When we started, we were concerned about all of those things, you know, clunky back end, if you like, for want of a better description. So, you know, that's a big relief that we're on the right track.
Absolutely. Yeah. Super exciting. A few other questions from the community here. Joel Bruce, our friend, had a question about, you know, combating GPS spoofing, and if you have any thoughts around that, Rob. I know it's a challenging problem.
Yeah, thanks for the easy one. Well, you combat that kind of attack by gathering data and analytics and pattern matching. So what we haven't spoken about is we've got an API feed from satellite imaging, so we can cross-reference the vineyard with the geolocation on the mobile phone and the request. So there's a kind of triangulation, and if anything is out of sync, then that raises an alert. The wineries themselves are known geolocations. So if a winery is not in the right place, as it were, when they're logging their events, then that would raise an alert as well. Now, of course, that might be there might be a perfectly good reason for that, but it just adds to that behavior that Jeff was referring to. You know, if there is fraud in the system and you're shining a light, then ultimately it'll go somewhere else, or it'll be driven out of business. And so it's not going to be, we're not going to be in a position where people don't try to game the system to start with, because that's what they do already. Yeah, but they'll soon find out that they won't be able to, and then they'll stop their bad practices or go somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
If Wine Australia mandate this, then not using it will be the biggest flag completely. You know, if you've got something to hide, then you're not going to be using the system.
Yeah, one thing we talk about internally, and AdStack's likely being a good example of this as well, is kind of a trust plus model where you're enabling the good actors to better prove their ability to do the right thing.
Sure.
And certainly
I think
applies here.
that's a good point, Gary, and that I always thought that if you like, an unknown benefit but significant is that when someone sees a bottle with that closure and just a little mark on it, whatever it might be, saying, well, this is NSEAL, which is part of this system process. That's a reinforcement that they could check by waving their phone over it, but they're probably not going to bother. So as it becomes, but anyone could do that. The importer can do it. the bottle shop person can do it, the restaurant can do it, you know, the consumer can do it. So at any point, it can be checked. So what's going to happen? I mean, people clearly, once they get to that point, it's unlikely that that's going to be checked very often. But that if that becomes the norm, then you know, the need to do all that pretty much is eliminated. But we're a long way from that. You know, we need. You can see we have 15 involved this year. Certainly a very big uptake, a bit like with the original screw cap story. But we need now to jump from there to having a significant uptake, because that will do what Rob touched on. I mean, all the points, all the detail forms a pattern, and then once we have that and Wine Australia can access it, you know, it's going to be very hard to get around that. Whereas now, Wine Australia often uses reasonableness. You know, they look at what do you normally get as an extraction from a region? What usually happens? And does this look a bit odd? I mean, they work on that, feeling like that feels right. You know, that's okay. I mean, when you've got nothing else, that can be very good. So a smart inspector can get a feeling about what's going on. But this is taking it to another level.
Absolutely.
And then there's a secondary benefit, of course, which may be a primary benefit for us, but it's the data that we're collecting. So it's the aggregation of the data. Things like yields on particular grapes in particular years are entirely speculative at the moment. You know, it's largely anecdotal or very kind of localized. We'll have data which we'll be able to feed back into the wine planning for the country based on, you know, climate change, bushfires, you know, COVID, you know, pick your latest crisis, right? And then we'll be gathering that data, and it'll be usable both for the good of the industry and Australia as a whole.
Very exciting. Well, I think that about wraps it up. We do have one question about, and this is really just throwing it out here. Pete is apparently very passionate about kiwi fruit and the ability to track something within a cardboard box. Do we happen to have any ideas to how to help Pete out?
Rob first, but maybe if this is, I'm just thinking it through. I mean, if this is recorded as it's picked, like for example, if it's picked into boxes, little bins, obviously the plan would be to track it from there, and from those, the record of that batch would then tell anybody what vineyard, what orchard it came from, where it came from, what property, and from there that can be tracked through. And then in terms of sealing it in a box, end seal has variations of just like tags over the edge of, you know, like a normal tag seal. And by doing so, it could tell whether that box has been tampered with. So, you know, just thinking through, that may not be the answer, but in general, it can be fairly easily modified with, you know, minimal changes to the process and the packaging to achieve. And I think that's what the question is. I think that person's asking, can I be sure that it is the real thing and where to come from? And this should be, with a little seal on it, should be able to just read it with your phone saying, this came from that place and it's the real thing. That's what should be quite easy to do.
I guess you need the analog of the bottle with the seal. So a cardboard box with a tamper-proof tag wouldn't necessarily be exactly the same, because the box could be tampered with. But one would. It depends what problem we're trying to solve. But there are all the elements and the components are there to do that, and the technology is just the same, exactly the same. So you know, we're looking at dairy very closely because from the process is very, very similar. I mean, you wouldn't think it in the first instance, but the making of a dairy product requires, you know, the paddock. You've got the pesticide-free or organic nature of the grass. You've got the cow. You've got the distribution, and you've got the production. And so we're we're mapping our own process against all these different agricultural processes and finding similarities across the whole spectrum.
Yeah, and I'd have to say, I just want to jump in and say, you know, that when you look at, it's almost absurd. We, you know, Grossett Wines are an organic, certified organic producer with Australian certified organic and biodynamic, and we do all of this stuff. Extraordinary amount of attention to that, which people generally appreciate. But often people say, well, wine's, you know, wine's pretty organic stuff anyway. It's not like they're not as concerned as their fruit and vegetables or their eggs or whatever. But the opportunity from there, after doing all of that, for someone to simply replace what you've done with something which could be not as good, be disappointing for the people, or it could in fact make them sick. I mean, the risk of that is so significant when at the same time we've got inspectors checking us all the time here. Everything's fine up to the point where it's in the winery and about to leave. It just is really quite a break in the chain in terms of immutability, in terms of assurance of customers, of consumers, you know, of so many things. And we're getting very concerned to the point that people appreciate, you know, organics, for example. But at the same time, the risk is just way higher, way more serious down the track. So, you know, we've got to, I think we've got to get consistent and pay the same amount of attention to everything that we're doing. And that's what I believe we're doing.
Very good. That seems like a good one to wrap it up on. Well, thank you, Jeffrey, Rob. I really enjoy this use case and what you guys are doing. You know, we're excited to hear some updates over you over the course of the next year. I think there's exciting times ahead.
Thanks a lot, Gary. Really appreciate it.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.